tonight, this is one of my most favorite topics to talk about. I could talk a lot longer than the hour I have, but for tonight, my goal really is to give you enough succinct information to kind of start you thinking, really kind of thinking about the learners that we work with, whether they're our children, our students, in our practice. I really want you to be thinking about some takeaways, if you will. So in a really short amount of time, I'm going to talk to you about some common differences in learning styles, and then how visual supports can help those types of deficits and skill deficits. So that's really my goal. We're going to go through some of it kind of quick, but I definitely want to make sure we have enough time for you to make some stuff and take it with you. We have plenty of stuff, so hopefully you'll leave with some things that are meaningful and helpful, and some resources on how to utilize that in the future. The visual support. So we're going to start really quick just as a warm-up, just to make sure you guys are awake. You had the long drive. It should be super easy. Show of hands, how many of you are readers? Can we read? Oh, great. Okay, so that's the beginning skill, so this should be no problem. So I'm going to just put a word up on there, and I just need you to go ahead and tell me what it is. Okay? Holman? Anyone? Just blurt it out if you know it. Does anybody know what the word is? Okay. How about now? What do you think it is? Men, a men's restroom? Right. Okay, let's try the next one. Malin. Anyone know what that is? What about now? Art. You're right. You're right with that one. What about the next one? Petit déjeuner. I'm sure I'm not saying it right, but I'm going to go with it. Anyone know what that is? I guess. Breakfast. Yeah? Who got that? And did I say it remotely correctly? No? Oh, you're just being kind, I think, but. Okay, and the last one, Eisenbahn. Anyone? No? What about now? Train. So when I added the visual support, how much did our accuracy increase? Pretty much 100%, right? But you all told me ahead of time you were readers. But you couldn't access the written word, right, the way, because you didn't have the same background or understanding unless you spoke a different language, which then you utilize that past experience and that knowledge base to answer the question. So in a really simple way, the power of visual supports that we use in our everyday life is super important. It helps give meaning and understanding to things that otherwise are difficult to understand. It facilitates learning for typical learners, diverse learners, for students, for adults. So I want you to be really thinking about, in this next slide, we're going to talk about how visual supports are utilized in your own life, okay? And really, this is pretty obvious, but just as a visual. Visual supports are anything that we can see. It makes auditory information visual. It sounds really simple, but oftentimes when we're working with individuals that need additional supports, the first question I always go to is there a way to make the information I'm presenting, the expectation, the task, visual, accessible, right? So that's what we're talking about with visual supports. So how does this apply in our own lives? I want you to think about what are some common struggles you have personally, and I'll give you kind of a context, like memory, organization, prioritizing, planning. These are all common things that we, as typical functioning adults, might struggle with on a day-to-day in our job, in our personal life, at home. So I want you to think about, with those kind of struggles, what do we use? What are some visual supports you use as an adult in your everyday life that helps with those things? To-do lists. A list. Is that what you were going to say? Organizers, like paper pencil organizers. Okay, how many of you use organizers like on your phone or on the computer? And how many prefer paper pencil? I kind of go between. I love buying the very cool organizers because I love the color-coded tabs, but then I really don't use them. They just look pretty amazing. So organizers, what else? To-do lists, yeah. Oh, that's great. So you have a clear, concrete, visual cue that tells you to drink water. It's in front of you and it reminds you. Okay, what else?
Google Maps.
Okay.
So like someone could tell me how to get there. And I need the map, like.
The visual and the reference. So a lot of telling and talking, right, is not going to help you as much if you have the visual to reference. I figure out when my phone's plugged in, sometimes my person talks to me and tells me where I'm going, which is a British male voice currently, which my husband is not a big fan of, but it keeps me engaged for my map. But sometimes he doesn't, I notice he doesn't say anything, and then I look and it's like telling me to turn, but I was waiting for the auditory cue too, kind of, so I've gotten reliant on that as well. What are some other things you might use? So we've got maps, checklists, what's that? Label, great. So putting labels for access so you know what it is for yourself, or it could be for others that are sharing your materials with you and they keep putting them in the wrong spot, right? Yeah. A calendar. Do you use it on your phone or do you kind of both? Okay, so you remember where you're going or where you're supposed to be. I know in my current life, because I'm here sometimes and I'm working in consultation sometimes, in my calendar, every task I have is color-coded to remind me kind of where I get up and I'm like, where am I supposed to be today, really? Or maybe the night before. But I reference it. My family calendar is different than my work calendar, and my husband has access to it. But we rely on a lot of visual cues, right, and supports. So I think you guys have hit on a lot of the common ones. How many of you use timers? Anyone use timers for anything? How many of you do a really good job if you're baking or cooking and you don't set a timer of always pulling out your food at the right time? Is anyone really good at that? So we use the visual, right? But it also has an auditory component to it too, but you can reference it and check and see how much time's remaining. What about Post-its? Anyone use Post-its? These are by far one of the most effective, low-tech, high-outcome visual supports for all types of learners. They're color-coded already. They come in varying sizes. They're movable. They're age-appropriate. If we can teach our learners at a young age to access and learn how to make visual cues like this and reminders and prompts, they're totally age-typical. It's appropriate to have it on our planner or at work, right? So be thinking about this when we think about visual supports. Depending on the learners that we work with or the children that we support, the visual support, we always want to match the needs of the learner, but we also need it to be age-appropriate as our learners progress in age, right? And setting appropriate. Do not think that these have they have more use than you would think in organizing binders and tasks and to-do bins and things and reminders. But something really basic that we all use, it is a visual support for us. This is my favorite. Do you guys utilize this visual support? What do you think this is from? Grocery store, right? I tell a story when I do this because I feel like I've always believed if we understand the role of visual supports or any strategy, this is just our topic for tonight, that we want to use with others or help others understand, we very much need to understand its impact in our own life first. So if we get the value and how it impacts our independence and our overall success, then we're going to do a better job teaching it, showing it, to our students, to our learners, modeling it, and really always being mindful of what the learner might need. So this is huge. I went into a local store in the town I live in. My husband, bless his heart, does most of our grocery shopping, which is amazing. But I went into Rayleigh's at the time, and they had completely flipped the store. They went through this new, we're gonna make it look cool kind of phase. Not cool. Like I walked in and I honestly stood where I normally went to go. I had to get in and get out because I hate the grocery store. I knew what I was getting, right? And I turned and almost left. Like I honestly was like, I do not have time for this because it was completely not as expected. So no one warned me. There was no warning cue outside that said, warning, you're about to walk into an environment that's been changed. No one prepped me or prepared me. And I, as a grown woman, walked in and was like, I'm not doing this. I totally wanted to task avoid, right? And escape the situation. But instead, I took a deep breath and acted like I was an adult person and could figure this out. And what do you think I utilized to increase my independence? I used the signs. So a store I had been in all the time, all of a sudden the expectations, like what I thought going into, completely changed. And the one thing I could rely on to still be an independent shopper was visual supports. I didn't need to go get the clerk at the front and say, I really need you to shop with me today. Like I can't find and I have 10 minutes and I really need to get out of the store. I didn't go get a person. right, to be my support, I looked to the visual supports within the environment. Now this seems pretty obvious, but I want you to think about that example for our learners that have very diverse needs. Oftentimes the support is a person, right? We attach adults or people, caregivers to individuals to help facilitate independence. And in some situations when it's medical, health, safety, that's definitely warranted. But we provide a lot of support to individuals with different learning needs by adding a person instead of teaching a strategy. And the power of teaching a strategy means we're teaching a lifelong skill. Because the kiddos I work with, that I have the great fortune to work with, I don't expect to be with them, right, when they're 80. I can't follow around all these people, reminding them to do things, helping to facilitate their independence, but I definitely can teach them how to access a visual support. So when I'm not around, what do they look at? The visual supports. And we have them everywhere. Traffic signs, flashing lights, color-coded signs, airport, security. There's a lot of visual supports in our life that we access. But for a lot of learners, we have to teach them how to access it. It's not enough that they're just there. We actually have to teach them that visual supports are critical and how to look for them. So think about your own life. You don't have to share out, but think about a time that you relied on a visual support and probably didn't even realize how much it was impacting your independence. So I was able to finish shopping. Not as efficiently as I would have had they not changed the store, but I was able to use a visual support to cope, right? I was able to look to where I was supposed to go. I was able to be an independent shopper because I was able to access the visual supports. So think about that in your own life and what that looks like. And then finally, the calendar. We talked about this, like using a calendar. We also sometimes attach it with an auditory cue as well, right? The prompt to go off, the reminder to get up and move, or to get up and walk, or to do something, to call somebody. So there's a lot of different things we can use, right? So these are high-level visual supports and cues we use. So we have to think then how that can apply to the individuals we support or the children in our families. And then you guys mentioned to-do lists. So now think about the learners or your own children. You mentioned your memory, exhaustion, planning, maps, getting lost. What are some just real quick common struggles with the learners? And when I say learners, I mean anyone you're working with, adults, children, that you commonly face. So those are common functions that what you've identified is within a class called executive functions. So these are basic cognitive skills that really impact our overall lifelong independence and behavior. You can take full classes, read a myriad of books on executive functioning skills. That's not my goal today. I think if you haven't heard of this before, then it's something that I would encourage you to go read more about. And it's meant to plant the seed that oftentimes the behaviors we see in ourselves and our learners come from a deficit area. So it benefits us if we can figure out what that potential deficit is, because then we're better prepared to come up with a great strategy for it. And the reason why we talk about executive functioning skills is because visual supports has a significant positive impact for a lot of learners in those common areas. So things to think about. We talked about planning, preparing, right? Making a plan, if it's a multi-step plan, preparing for your day, organizing yourself, organizing a backpack, organizing a workspace, organizing a binder, keeping your clothes in the closet where they're supposed to be. Are some of these developmentally based? Sure, as individuals grow and learn developmentally, these skills increase. But a lot of times, if you're working with individuals that have diverse learning needs, we can see that there's still gaps in some of these skills, even when it's older, when typical learners might not be experiencing that same deficit. Focus, so attention to a task, like you mentioned, the ability to multitask, and then the memory piece. What we know for sure when we look at all of these executive functioning skills, if we can work on these skills, it does lead to greater independence as an individual. And independence could be in work, within home, within relationships, within tasks, within school, right, within family responsibilities. But if we can address and identify how to support our learners build these skills or come up with strategies to kind of compensate for that deficit, our whole goal in this is independence. How many of you love being independent? Show of hands. Like, how many of you would love it if someone had to help you get up and get dressed to get into your car and met you at the door and walked and you couldn't do anything without them? Is that what we strive for? No, it's in our nature. We grow, we learn from every experience that we're ultimately seeking out independence. Are there times that we're dependent upon others? Sure. And there's a process to be more and more independent. But when I talk about this, and the reason why I love it and the work I get to do is because ultimately, no matter any individual I come into contact with, my whole goal is, what does that individual want to do? What do they want to access? What's their interest? And how can I support them meet that goal and be more independent in doing so? Because that's really what we're all striving to do. So just a quick review, you've got your thinking, and I have this book, The Smart But Scattered, up here as well. I've got a bunch of books you can look at afterwards, but I just thinking about executive functions of the brain. We have some thinking-based behaviors and then the behavioral that we might see. So emotional control we hadn't really talked about, but the behavior sustained attention, task initiation. A lot of learners can often know what to do in a task, but they have a hard time getting started. Have you ever experienced that? And often I hear teachers say, I know he knows what to do, he just doesn't want to do it. So it could be a motivation issue, which would be a different discussion, but a lot of time it's a task initiation issue. So if you know the child or the learner has the skill, you have to ask kind of what's keeping them from starting that skill, and oftentimes it could be task initiation. One thing I just want to make sure we're really clear about, intellectual ability does not automatically lead to advanced executive functioning skills. These do not go together in partnership. It is important to understand that students with average or above average IQ can definitely have deficits in executive functioning skills. So what I said earlier, my goal ultimately, if we have increased awareness about the deficit and our ability to identify our learners' strengths and areas of need, then we can create a plan about what they might need, those strategies might be, and that could lead to learner success and independence. So first it's our awareness to look for the deficits and the needs of the learners and look for the strengths and to make a plan and think about what strategies. So that was a really quick nutshell on those kind of executive functioning skills, but just be thinking as we talk about the visual supports, how that visual support helps with that deficit or that need, okay? Any questions for me at this point? All right, so visual supports. How many of you currently use visual supports in your work with your own children or in your practices? So I put this up there. Visual supports is identified as an evidence-based practice by the National Professional Development Center. They did a huge review of a ton of research. You can find more on their website that will give you a lot more details than that one sentence I just said, but my goal in sharing it with you is, it is an evidence-based practice, which means it's been shown to be effective in research studies for a multitude of learners with autism across age ranges. And its application has been shown to be effective across several skills, like independence and adaptive skill and academic skills. Yes, this is an autism site, right? And a review specifically for individuals with autism. But I want you to know that visual supports have been found effective for learners of all styles and needs. It's not specific to autism. Going back to the deficits we just talked about, any individual that has difficulty in planning, prioritizing, task initiation, sustained attention to a task, goal-directed behavior, visual supports could be effective for that learner. So there is research behind this. This is why we're bringing it to you tonight, and something that's been shown to be effective. So there's a lot of types of visual supports. I'm giving you like little Cliff Note versions of each one. Visual supports, just like you use them in your own life, they're accessible to all learners across all ages and all settings. We talked about they can support learners with deficits in executive functioning. They can help with communication, capitalize on visual strengths. They provide lasting information, just like the grocery store idea or the map that you mentioned, following a map. It's something that you can reference later. A lot of verbal information is fleeting, right? But the visual can stay with us longer and allows people to access it and reference it to hopefully impact their independence. And we talked about facilitating independence, and visuals can often also be used to clarify rules and expectations. How many of you gone into a room ever that it said, please like quiet or silence your phones, or you walked into a library and it said no food or drinks? So that's in a written format, but if you notice, a lot of them also will have the image with the universal not available or don't do, that's a visual support. So I didn't know the rules or expectations if I walk into a building, and now all of a sudden it's really clear and right in front of me, right? So examples in our everyday life. So really just trying to get you to shift your focus. If you're not already doing this, I could encourage you to shift your focus whenever possible from telling to showing. It makes a huge difference. I learn best, someone showing me first, kind of writing it down. I get to practice on my own, right? It's kind of that like I do, we do, you do, to go through that idea. But also I want something to reference long after someone has showed me how to do something. So there's a bunch of types of visual supports. These are the ones I'm going to talk about today to kind of give you an idea of how they might be utilized, okay? You also have on your table a resource sheet that I put together. These are great places that you can go after this to get a lot more information about specific visual supports if you're interested. I'll talk about a module, online free modules where you can view on evidence-based practices and kind of take your time with it to go through or get more ideas. So, and emotional rating scales. So the first one is schedules. How many of you use a personal schedule? Calendar in your iPhone? Great. So we know they have value. So oftentimes I'm asked when I'm creating schedules for individuals, younger classrooms and high school, I will have teachers or other individuals who it comes from a source of a good place, like, you know what, he's getting to all of his classes now, can we just get rid of the schedule? Because we sometimes think if we're providing a support, it should immediately be faded. But then I usually say, okay, give me your phone. You're here today at work, you did a great job, you don't need it anymore. Let's delete your calendar off and all your appointments. You've been super successful for 30 years making all your appointments, so why do you need your schedule now? Right? Does that make sense? Would we ever do that? No, because it's a support we know we need in our life. So it's no different than learners. We need to be mindful of making visual supports appropriate across the ages and across the settings. That's what we need to be thinking about. Is it appropriate for a high schooler to be using a huge schedule, which I'll show you a picture of, where they pull off pictures if they're in gen ed classes? And probably not. We could probably think of a way to put it in a binder, right? To put it on a phone, whatever might be usable long term. So schedules are pretty self-explanatory. They really can reduce anxiety and frustration. They can help learners prepare and plan for changes in their day. They give them an expectation. They can see activities over time. And really allows the learner to practice independence. So I've highlighted in yellow this supports related to the common executive functioning skill deficits that you might see in your learners, and this specific strategy can support. Highlighting is another great visual support to utilize with learners to highlight critical information. You can color code the differences in highlighters if there's specific information. I have some teachers who have used highlighting to help with reading comprehension in classrooms. So kiddos learn to highlight the noun in green, the action in blue, and it gives them a visual context. So sometimes I've had learners go, that's the blue guy. Like actually reading through, like that's the person who does the things, he's blue. And if that helps give something really abstract, like reading comprehension, like who, where, and why, if a visual cue can give a learner some really concrete information, then we've made, could they use a highlighter for the rest of their life? Absolutely. How many of you use highlighters? Anyone? We use them, right? So let's think about how we use things currently, how those can be applied for some of our learners. So schedules can help with initiation, getting started, help with planning and organization. And remember, I know there's all types of learners, so it might be initially that you have an individual where you're going to be setting up the schedule and they need a high level of assistance. That's great. Just always be thinking about the end game, what's the most advanced for that individual? Because it varies, because every learner is unique. So we need to think about what that person needs now and what we think that person's going to need a year from now and 5 years from now, and make sure we're planning for independence. The next one, so picking the schedule. This is, I do a full training on just visual schedules, so I try to include here on the things to think about. So really you have to think about when you're developing a schedule what your learner might need and what has meaning. So if you don't have, if you're working with an individual that's not a reader, you couldn't use written word, right? If you have an individual that can't discriminate between pictures or icons, you might have to use real photographs. So there's an advancement to looking at what a learner can use. And typically this is the order that we go in. You start with a real object because it's the most functional and concrete. So if I'm going to snack and you hand me a cup, I take my cup to snack and it gets filled with juice. That is meaningful and functional, and I learn that a cup means drink and snack. If I have more advanced skills and I don't need the real object, but I can't yet use the icons, and when I say icons, this is kind of what I'm talking about. You know, the representation a little bit more abstract. It'd be photos, and then to colored icons, and then to black and white, and written word, right? And written word is our highest level. How many of you currently have real photograph schedules in your planners? Anyone take pictures of everything? No. Our highest level is written word, right? I have a written word, and then sometimes I use the highlighter to remind me or to categorize what I'm doing. But that's the highest level. And then for schedules, you also want to think about too much information sometimes makes it not an effective strategy. So if I put 10 activities on a schedule at once, you might lose me in the information. I might be so overwhelmed I can't discriminate, I can't look. So maybe the individual you're working with or supporting needs one piece of information at a time. So do you see the progression? So with schedules, it's really important to think about that. Here's a couple examples. This is an example of an object schedule in a classroom. The bus represented arrival, spoon was snack, this went to the work table, so on. There was a writing task. 5, they went to a magnet board and did math. So they all had meaning, and then they matched it when they got there. So there's an example of that. This is an advanced object. This is more basic. This is actually from back when I was in the classroom, but a single object. So the kiddo loved balls. That's how we got them to transition to recess. They took a ball. They got to play with the ball at recess, and then we had a different item to come back. We got them to come to circle time because we use CDs. Do you still use CDs in your room, or is it all on your phones? And so she took the CD when she walked in, and she put it in the player, and it was her favorite song. So it was meaningful and functional and helped her to transition. Moving to real photo schedules. So this is what it is, a picture of the real photo with this one has a label on it. And then icons with words. So colored icons with the word above it. So this was organized within the home. This parent had a morning schedule, an afternoon, and an evening schedule, or what to do when you wake up. And then the written word can be on a piece of paper, in a binder, on a clipboard. This is a binder. This is a great example of individualizing a schedule. You'll notice there's written words down here, and the student themselves actually learn to write down their own schedule because that's our ultimate goal. But there was a couple that they actually used the icon, the picture with the written word, because the student didn't quite have access to that word independently, so wouldn't always know what it meant. So this is an example of doing a part, right, really responsive to the learner's needs. And then the idea being they would fade the pictures as soon as they were independent with the reading. And this is a more basic high school schedule that we utilize, so just list the period and the classes and a check off when they're done, pretty straightforward, okay? So that's a progression of schedules. Obviously, what I'm showing you, not to overwhelm you with all of this, even though I know it can be, but to really get you thinking about how much you can differentiate individual visual supports. And that part's really important. It is not a one size fits all. Our schedules look very different from one another. But we have the ability to kind of think through and problem solve and reflect when something's not working for us. And some of our learners might not have that reflective ability yet. So that's our job, right? To kind of present something, to walk them through it, and to really pay attention to their behavior and see how it's working, and buying in and then helping to adjust that. So we adjust ours a ton, but don't underestimate the power of our ability to self-reflect and problem solve. Like, I really don't like that. I was late for that. I forgot about that, right? We have this ability to kind of troubleshoot, but for a lot of our learners, we're that person that's helping them do that until they can do that on their own. So there's a lot of different types of schedules. I talked through this. You really need to plan, prepare, think about your learner, think about what's appropriate, and teach it to them systematically. We don't just slap it up or hand it to them and be like, someone said a schedule is supposed to work for you, right? Start following it. So we really start small and teach through the schedule. Another visual support is rules. So a portable system for showing expectations or rules in an environment. Really, it's pretty straightforward. They show the expectations, they show the rule, they provide clear and consistent information. It's really important that they state the expected behavior. we give a lot of airtime to word, like our language and what we talk about. It's super important that we front load with what is expected instead of what we don't want somebody to do. So stop yelling, stop hitting, stop standing there, stop being that close, stop. If I'm good at stopping, but if you don't ever tell me what else I'm supposed to do, guess what I'm gonna go back to? I'm gonna go back to what I know. So oftentimes we state what we want someone to stop doing, and we forget that the power is in telling them what they should do, right? Stop talking out in class. Instead of, you can raise your hand if you have something you want to say to me, right? Or instead of like, stop getting so close, stop getting in his space. How about can you do one arm length and take a step back? So it's visual, it's clear, I can do it all the time. I mean, I meet some adults that I feel like I need to teach that role to, like, whoa, you're kind of in my bubble. So there are lots of things we can teach, but we need to make sure we're not saying, stop, don't, you can't, but instead telling them what they should be doing in the situation. And it does serve as a reminder. So rules help with these deficits. Working memory. So working memory is our ability to hold on to something in our head that we've learned a few minutes ago or previously, hold it in our head, walk around with it, and then pull it back out and use it to perform a task. So oftentimes in classrooms, teachers rely on a lot of working memory. And oftentimes with kiddos who don't have great working memory, you see a kid who sits still, who stops participating, who stops doing their work because they lost them in the first step. So if I say, I want you to take out your math workbook, when you do that, I want to take out your math workbook, you need to turn to page 32, and when you get there, I need you to do the odd problems and then share back with a partner. How often, though, if you're in gen ed classrooms or in different settings, it happens a lot. It happens in work environments. It happens in our own conversations sometimes. But if I'm holding on to, I got to take out my workbook, and I'm working really hard to remember that, do you think I heard anything else? Mm-mm. So, or I don't have access to that. I can't remember what book that is because I really have poor working memory. And then I got really nervous and I stopped listening because I got nervous. I don't know what book that is. I'm going to sit at my desk and kind of stare. And if I haven't been taught to look to my peers for cues and information, which is a critical life skill that we all use, I don't even look to the peer next to me and go, oh, that book is green. I need to find my green book. I sit still, or I put my hoodie over my head, or I go under my desk, or I break my pencil on my desk, a variety of different things. So sometimes it might look like an individual is not engaged or participating, but really it goes back to they don't have any idea of what you ask them to do, or they can't access any of that prior learning. Working memory is huge. So a lot of times the sticky notes, a lot of teachers will do color-coded sticky notes or in the home on refrigerators of expectations. Just a really quick reminder. Reminder, no juice until you ask mom first, right? Expectation, or ask mom before you open this fridge. Because you might have said it 20 times. And if you say, I've told them that 20 times, guess what? That usually means you need a visual support. They know what to do, I've told them, they're just not doing it. Maybe they're just not understanding or remembering. So those are the things to think about. A couple examples of rules in the community and what's expected. And then a first then board, super basic. Anyone use basic first then contingencies, verbally or visually? It's kind of a part of our, first I'm gonna do that and then I'll get a coffee. First, I'm going to go to that meeting, and then I'll get, right? We really operate in a first-then contingency world. We use it a lot in our relationships, and our interactions, and our work, and our tasks. And so for learners, it's a great way to kind of set the stage for them, to let them know, typically, that a preferred is coming after a non-preferred to get their motivation. Look, I know that we have to go to the grocery store, but after we go to the grocery store, grandma's coming. So first we're going to go to the grocery store, and then grandma will be here when we get back, right? So it is a really, really basic visual support that has a high payoff for all learners. So you can make it visual. If you have a learner that can access verbal and that's their area of strength, you can use it verbally. But just always be thinking about the first then, setting the stage. It helps with transitions, especially difficult transitions, going from preferred to non-preferred. And it does help with working memory. It helps with initiation to get them started, to remember what they're going to do, planning, and then that sustained attention to task. It's an easy visual reminder. Hey, I know you're working hard on the computer, but remember, after computer, we have recess. Right? And you can pair it with a visual timer, which I'll show you in a second. Here's a couple examples of first then. So first, using the restroom, and then you get blocks, washing hands, then you get your truck. This one was for a student we used a long time ago. But first he had to get in the car, then he went to the doctor, which it was an absolutely significant traumatic event for him and for the family. And then he got McDonald's, so he really coveted the fries. The McDonald's fries. So they ended up, it used to be he got access to them all the time, but then we started having them save that just for when they had to go to doctor visits, because they had some that were frequent, but they would miss the visit because it took them over an hour and a half to get them in the car and to be safe. So they started using a first then contingency with him that was really quick, not this big one, but he learned the concept. So first get in the car and buckle, and then we had the fries. So first get in the car, and then we're gonna drive, and then you get the fries. And eventually it was first then, it was shaped up, right? So a lot of times we have to do this in baby steps. So that's a couple examples. There's also a great app called the First Then Visual Scheduler. It is on your handout as an app. It is a paid app, I think, but a lot of families like it because you can take, these are icons that are already in it, but you can actually take real photos. So like of your breakfast table or their room or your classroom, you can take the picture and you can pull it over in the order you need your kiddo to complete things, and then they can swipe it and clear it. And so you can take pictures at preferred. It's a really great tool and app that's pretty user-friendly. There's a lot of apps out there. I really, just a side note, I get no, obviously, benefit for telling you which apps or books or things to look into. I try to think of things that parents or practitioners or clinicians have told me they found effective, because there's a lot out there, and I'm not using them every day as frequently as I used to, so I get feedback from others, and that's the ones I kind of share when I do talk. So this is one that's been effective. Visual cues for teaching, same thing, visual to kind of help with very critical information. Help, break, and wait are really critical lifelong skills. Our ability to ask for help when we need it, our ability to wait appropriately, and our ability to take a break, right? A break doesn't mean a timeout that's given by a teacher. Break means teaching appropriate self-regulation to kind of get your emotions back together so you can access. So breaking these down a little bit, the wait card is just a concrete reminder of wait. Do you know what often wait means to a lot of learners and students in school? What do you think wait means, really? No. No or never. Wait, we'll talk about that later, because either I did it because I really didn't want to answer the question, right? Or I didn't know the answer to the question, or I knew the answer, but I didn't really want the behavior that was going to come after I gave the answer. Right? So a total avoidance on my part to not really answer. So we tend to use wait, but wait often for a lot of individuals means never, or I don't know when. So either then I'm going to ask you over and over and over and over and over and over and over again because I don't know what it means, or I'm going to have a really large response to it because I think it means I'm never going to get it. So it seems really simple. Some use this wait card. There's ones you can take with you that we've made for you. Some teachers use color-coded stickies that just mean wait. The power of this is it's contingent. You have a job to do. If I ask you to wait, I need to tell you for how long, and I need to make sure I honor that. That's the biggest piece to this. So waiting is giving them something concrete to do with their hands if they hold the card, and teaching them how to wait. When you go to the doctor's office, how many of you often wait? Anyone? So any of you have tantrums recently in the doctor's offices? Were you rolling around? Sarah did. Did people report you? Any problems, screaming, yelling? What did you do when you were asked to wait? What did you do? How did you occupy your time? You read a book? Read magazines that you brought with you or in the office? In the waiting room? What else? Check your phone. So we have learned over time how to wait well, even if we don't like it, right? And I call people's purses or backpacks like a wait bag. So I learned how to do that over time, right? Because I had one experience and I'm like, I am never having this experience again. So then I came up with my own strategy. But a lot of our learners, they need to learn how to wait. You need to give them an activity or teach them how to bring something with it, or giving them something to hold or to fiddle with, or even a timer. So that is a huge life skill that we often don't systematically teach, but waiting in gen ed classrooms, waiting in a workplace, waiting in a social interaction, it's a critical skill and oftentimes a deficit for a lot of our learners that end up limiting their access. Just the inability to wait limits their access to things they might want to do. So be thinking about what that looks like for your learner and how they can wait. And there's a timer you can add to it too, the time timer. There's a timetimer.com. There's an app you can load on your phone. There's lots of different timers. I like this one because it shows time passing. Break card, same idea as teaching wait. Systematic, planned, how to take a break appropriately. You all have taken a break already with me here tonight. I'm not offended. You already did. It was maybe a short brain break. Maybe you thought of what you need to do when you get home. Maybe you're like, oh, I wonder how my kids are doing. Maybe you switched your legs or recrossed them. You doodled on your paper to stay alert. Those are all breaks. We take them to regulate ourselves, sometimes to regulate our emotions so we can access what we want to do. Break is another important thing for our kiddos, our learners, our adults. Identifying when you need a break and how to take a break appropriately is really important. So using a basic visual cue to cue that behavior and teach the expected can often make a big difference for a lot of individuals. And then the helping hand. This is very primary looking and young looking. I would be not expecting a college student I'm helping to walk around with a big blue hand and being like, help, right? If I'm on a college campus, that might make them look a little bit different. But the idea is there a visual way to cue someone they can ask for help or how to get that? Some of our learners want to ask for help, but they have a lot of anxiety about reaching out or initiating that conversation. So sometimes teaching them how to use a visual to access other people is helpful. Token boards is another visual support for motivation. Providing positive reinforcement to the learner, giving them tokens for completing tasks. How many of you are familiar with token economy systems? So this is obviously can be in a reinforcement training or motivation. I included it today, because you can make one and take it with you if you want, and also because it's a really powerful visual support. It helps show what someone's interested in and working for, and it also shows time passing that they're achieving that goal, no matter how short. Someone can use a token system in a minute and finish it. Others you might use for a couple hours. The one thing I always bring up is if you're using a token system with an individual, make sure you are accountable. If someone earns the tokens, they get what they earned. I also am not a huge proponent of response cost, which means I take away things that are earned. So if I come to work every day, in my contract, my token economy is I get paid once a month, and I had one bad day. Can you imagine what we would do? We're like, you know what, Amber, when you were here yesterday, you weren't really on your A game. So we've docked a day's pay from your paycheck, but it's totally fine. I need you to stay motivated, and I don't know if I'm gonna do it again, but I might, right? What would that do to our behavior? How motivated do you think I would be? I wouldn't be, because we had an agreement. I showed up and did what I was supposed to do. Now, there is research behind doing response cost and teaching it well. I will say in all my years of working as a behavior analyst and I have not utilized it or employed it, because I feel like the power comes in the agreement. If I've set a deal with someone and there's expected behaviors for earning a token economy system and a payoff, then I'm gonna honor that agreement. It might take them longer to earn it, right? But I'm not gonna take away something that was earned. So you'll have the opportunity to make a token economy system based on your learner's needs. Okay, this just went through what I explained. You have it in your handout. Here's a couple sample token systems as well. You can see there's icons, multiple icons. There's a basic checkoff one for the written word, I'm working for a computer or break, and they can check off the spots. This is an example of a token economy system we use in our own life. How many have punch cards, coffee cards, smoothie cards? Token system. If you purchase 10, I promise you get a free one, right? Has anyone ever taken back one of your punches? You know what, you were grumpy when you ordered your smoothie yesterday, you don't get a punch. Has that ever happened? No, we get it, we get to turn it in, it's because it's an agreement. This is a basic example of a token economy system that we used. Checklist, super simple. I included examples here. I think we all know what a checklist looks like. Checklists are really important for our learners as well because they help with working memory, initiation, shifting attention. especially in multiple step problems, math problems, reading assignments, chores at home, packing for a trip, getting on an airplane. All of these things that have multiple steps to get a learner or individual to be independent, we can think about a checklist. So most of us who might not love grocery shopping, but use a list typically because it helps with our working memory, right? We remember what we're supposed to, ideally, we remember. The worst is you put on your list, you get home, and you still didn't even get it, right? That was on your list, but we use lists for a reason. It's meant to help us remember, give us a concrete thing to reference, help with our efficiency, and we have really clear expectations. So there's a lot of different uses for different checklists. This come from, here's a couple different examples, a grocery list. These are on understood.org, which is a really great free resource, tons of parent-friendly, teacher-friendly information. These are made, you can download them right where they are. Getting ready for bed, bedtime is oftentimes a tricky time. Getting up in the morning could be a tricky time, so checklists can be super helpful there too. There's some checklists for calming down, basic kind of steps. This one I have for you tonight if you like it, and it's just a visual. You might have been telling people take 3 deep breaths, I need you to count to 5, but a lot of times if someone's in a highly agitated state, how many of you love it if you're just irritated and you're doing your best to hold it together and you're happy no one knows what's happening inside your head or your internal thoughts, right? And then someone starts talking to you. How many of you prefer to be talked to when you're highly agitated? Anyone? Not usually, right? So visual cueing instead of verbal talking when you're working with someone who's trying to cope and handle emotions is really powerful. It could just be that neutral blue or sunshiny yellow sticky you put in front of them to be like, hey, maybe you need a break, or when you have 5 minutes we can talk, and you walk away. Or it could be a gesture to get them, a nice gesture to get them where they're going or what they need to do. It could just kind of be like, I think you need 5, but that's still words. So putting a visual cue down in front of someone that you've already pre-taught, you've taught this to somebody when they're not highly agitated or upset, God bless you, that they can go through so they've had exposure to it, it's really effective. So visuals for emotional regulation is a huge visual support to consider. And that kind of takes us into this last one, which I'm not going to spend a bunch of time. There's a lot of online training about emotional rating scales and how to use it effectively. Like I said, this in itself is a half day to go over. But there's different types of rating scales. Any of you use these currently? Color-coded? There's a lot of different versions of them. So I included 2. We made 2 for you. One has numbers related. One has the emotional faces to it. But really thinking about a visual way to help others identify their emotional state, and then identifying their emotional state, and the most important thing is to do what you do when you're in there, right? Take a walk, go punch your pillow if you're at home. I mean, whatever's appropriate. Walk to the back of the classroom, go get a drink of water. If you think about all the ways we take breaks when we kind of need to reset ourselves, those are the things we need to think about for our learners. So there's a couple different, oh, I thought I had this working. There's a couple different examples, and I have some of the books up here. So these are just samples of what it can look like. Sometimes people include special interests. So this kiddo loved Superman, and so had Superman cues of his emotional state. So there's a lot of different ways. Like I said, there's books up here. You can get more information about emotional rating scales, but it's just kind of a sample for you. And then I did give you a resource on your table that has the resources I've talked about today. And then the AFIRM website I referenced earlier is a really great free website. I definitely recommend you check it out. It has all 27 evidence-based practices that have been identified as effective when working with individuals with autism. They're about an hour to an hour and a half modules. They give you resources. There's a parent's tip sheet that comes with it. There's a checklist on how to get started. If you're working with others and you want to share information, it's a great tool for training, if you will. If you have a babysitter that you want to understand more about supports or the visuals you use in your house, if you have a family member who doesn't understand kind of what you're doing with reinforcement, if you're in the classroom and you have some helpers that come in and they ask you a lot of questions, this is a great resource to reference, to utilize with a lot of great downloadable forms. It's nationally available. All you have to do is put in your email. That's not because they send you things, it's because they track it. So it was initially funded through research, and the funding for that has since stopped. So they're taking any type of They're really tracking how many users are using it so that they hopefully can keep it up and running. I definitely would encourage you to take a look at it. And then it also has, if you're interested in the research part, it has all the articles they utilize to identify it as an evidence-based practice. So you can download the brief on each of the strategies.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.